Congressman Jim Moran, Democrat from Northern Virginia, when you first walked into the halls of Congress as a freshman member of the House, what were you thinking?
I was stunned that I was even there. I was kind of taken back by the idea that I was part of such a great institution. I was intimidated by almost all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and uh, I I couldn't wait to try to make some difference, to um, uh, act purposefully. Um, I'm sure that that impression is consistent with just about everybody else. But then after you settle in, uh, you realize that the gloss is um, is lessened. You realize that everyone you're dealing with is human, has their frailties and their characteristics, many of which they try to hide from their constituency. But uh, I I always felt that I was lucky to be there and almost a fraud, to be in a position of such influence. Um, but after 24 years, you gain a perspective sometimes that's different from when you began.
In those 24 years,
Yeah.
you worked with and under a lot of speakers,
Yes.
Democrat and Republican. With the Democratic leadership, what kind of pressure did you feel or face from them?
It changed when Nancy Pelosi became Speaker
Why?
because she understood power and was willing to exercise it. And so the Congress became more of a parliamentary body. We wouldn't always agree with the president, but we had to agree with the Speaker. Um, and she allowed for very little diversion from her objective. Many times I would vote differently than the Democratic majority. And the gentleman's name was George Kendanis, who worked the floor. And he'd come down to you and he'd ask why you're voting this way. He'd make you explain. He'd say, this is important to the speaker. Do you really want to do this? That's oftentimes I'd change the vote because it wasn't worth alienating the speaker. But she, I think, was probably the strongest speaker we've ever had. And even though we had a number of run-ins, disagreements, the reality is that I respect her tremendously. Uh, uh, and I think the current president does as well. He tries to avoid being critical of her because he knows she won't tolerate it. Um, it's a matter of leadership. She was a true leader, uh, and and she was somebody that earned our respect, really.
When you talk about crossing the aisle
Mm.
and working from Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill, one of the issues it comes down to is what's the incentive? And part of the incentive has to be purple districts, not solid red, not solid blue districts. How does it work in Virginia? How are the districts drawn? And if you could change any way that the districts are drawn anywhere in the country, how would Jim Moran do it?
The districts are gerrymandered, uh, particularly in the South. Uh, a deal was made with the African American community, if you will, in most of the southern states, that they would have safe districts as long as the Republicans would have adjoining districts that were safer for them. And so, it was a bad deal for the Democratic Party as a whole in the South. It was a good deal for the incumbent members who represented minority districts. But that was one of the things, and the South is, uh, generally speaking, is all Republican now because of gerrymandering. But California is gerrymandered as well. We rely upon statisticians, mathematicians who figure out how to give respective parties their strongest candidate. And the problem, of course, is that when you have gerrymandered districts that are drawn to be safe, then you don't need to listen to the other side. And that's just wrong. I mean, in addition to the fundraising aspect of congressional service, the gerrymandering it's a scandal, really, and it means that moderate adults who see both sides of the picture and would be able to bridge differences and to truly lead, they don't get through a primary because they're willing to take votes that have to be explained. And so what we have are people who are in the Democratic Party considerably to the left of the majority of the American people. And you similarly have that in the Republican Party. And that's why the so-called MAGA movement is as strong as it is. Donald Trump's version of republicanism is not consistent with the Republican leaders that I'm familiar with and that I respect. And likewise, the Democrats, if you look at the Democratic National Committee, virtually every staff person, supervisor, and particularly candidate is much to the left of where the American people are. The American people, maybe 23% or so, consider themselves liberals, and yet it's almost 100% of the Democratic electeds. There are very few exceptions, Jared Golden in Maine and so on, but he's an outlier. So we don't have a Congress that's representative of the vast majority of people in the way that the founding fathers intended. It represents the extreme ends of both parties, and that doesn't serve us well. It doesn't serve the country well, and I think we're seeing the results today as we speak.
So how do you fix that, realizing it is a 50-state issue because each state has a different policy and procedure? One that seems to work is Iowa. Can you do what Iowa's doing, make it drawn by population and counties, not by neighborhoods, to ensure that you have congressional districts that are going to be competitive, that allow you to give that incentive to cross the aisle?
It would be fine with me, understanding that Iowa is, for the most part, conservative Republican. But I think that the system they have is preferable to the system that we have in a lot of, particularly the big states. I mean, I think Nebraska's system is fine, Maine's system, but where we have the largest number of members, the most populous states, it's not good because it is consistently gerrymandered. I mean, it's fixed. Some seats are Democratic, some seats are Republican. Never the twain will mix.
Now, your district obviously is very close to Washington, D.C.,
Yeah.
so you don't have the problem of traveling back and forth. How much time did you spend in your district meeting with constituents and interest groups?
I spent virtually all my time. I was obsessive about that, and that's probably why I was never defeated, as even though I would at times um, take Herculean actions to make my seat competitive. I nevertheless survived, and I think it's because I did get out to meet people, and I listened to people from all different perspectives. Um, so it was an advantage to live in the district. But when I was first elected, I was elected like 0.2%, a very close district. It was a Republican incumbent.
1990.
1990, and really it was a Republican seat, but it was kind of a tossed-up seat, and the incumbent had voted. Had taken some votes that were not in the interest of federal employees. He had taken, at least publicly, a fairly extreme position on abortion, a number of things that had made him vulnerable. And I was kind of an upstart and aggressive. And I didn't really know him. If I had known him, I wouldn't have been as aggressive and I probably would have lost. But over time, my district was gerrymandered. So it became a safe district. They united the county of Arlington, Virginia, with the city of Alexandria and in the more liberal, populous parts of Fairfax County. And so it was a safe seat. That was not in my best interest or the country's best interest, to be honest with you. And um, it was enjoyable to have a safe seat, but the reality is that the votes that I took that I regret the most were taken because I knew the vast majority of my constituency wanted me to vote that way, and thus I felt I had a responsibility to do so.
You ran against Stan Paris.
Yeah.
So why do you say if you had known him, did you grow to like him?
Yeah, he wasn't a bad guy. I didn't know anything about him. I only knew what the Democrats said about him, and his previous opponents had said about him. But he wasn't a bad guy, and I wound up kind of feeling guilty that I went after him so aggressively. That's politics, I guess. But I also missed having a constituency that where I had to look at other points of view. As the original district went far down into rural counties, like you would be familiar, Steve, Stafford and Spotsylvania County, where it was clearly conservative, and I wanted to get everybody's vote, so I had to listen to him. Then after gerrymandering, I really didn't, and the conservatives only made up maybe 25% of the electorate. So, and that's the problem. Consultants will come in and say, ignore them. You don't need them. Just appeal to the Democratic base, because that's the problem with our politics. It's on both sides of the aisle, and it's regrettable.
So how does Jim Moran, as a member of Congress, deliberate over a vote that would affect the constituents, the majority of the constituents, versus something you feel fervently about? How do you balance that?
Well, it's a judgment call. I do listen to my staff because I had great confidence in my staff. I had a superb staff. But it's the kind of thing at 3:00 in the morning, you wake up and you realize you've got to make a decision here. But in retrospect, the votes that I took where I was in a very slim minority. For example, I voted against the Defense of Marriage Act because I felt that gay people should have a right to the pursuit of happiness as well. Why are we restricting that? So, but there were only maybe 5% of the Congress who voted that way. I know the people who voted with me. Likewise, I was strongly opposed to the Iraq War. I knew it was wrong, and I had sufficient inside information to be sure it was wrong. But that was about 10% of the Congress voted with me initially. And the votes that I regret are the ones where I was in the substantial majority, but I should have taken on the special interests. One, for example, in the District of Columbia that I still regret. I voted with the teachers because the teachers are part of organized labor, and they didn't want choice schools where parents can choose the school they go to. And I knew that a lot of parents feared not only for the academic, the lack of academic input from the public schools where they lived, but they feared for the safety of their own children. If they wanted to take the initiative, they had the right to get vouchers and to go to different schools out of their neighborhood because the statistics were compelling. Their kids were going to go nowhere and never have a competitive job, never be able to support a family, particularly the young men. And yet, because the teachers union didn't want it, I voted with labor. And of course, during COVID, I think if I left just before COVID, but during COVID, it bothers me so much that the Democratic Party supported the teachers' unions in terms of going back to school, and so we condemned these a cohort of children who in public schools who are never going to be competitive in our economy. Teachers were the first to be vaccinated, the last to go to work, and that was just pure politics where we put organized labor ahead of the interests of low-income families, particularly children in public schools. Those are the kinds of things that that bother me greatly when I should have, I should have opposed what we were doing, because it's special interests are it's the bane of the legislative body, and increasingly they control the vote because they're a source of substantial political donations, and the leadership needs the political donations to win, and so every special interest exerts a price for their support, for their money. There are very few checks, except for a few people who contribute $5 or $10, but there are very few checks that are written where there is not something expected in return, and that perverts the political process, and obviously has a negative effect upon our national policy.
So based on all of that, did you ever sponsor, co-sponsor a bill or cast a vote that you thought, I'm going to be primaried in the next election?
Yeah, I did.
But you weren't worried.
I was worried. Oh, I was worried, and I did get primaried, and I almost lost. I had to work a lot harder than I wanted to. One vote was the Iraq War, where the Jewish community felt very strongly, and I knew that many of the people who in that community were driving the Iraq War. I knew it was wrong, and it was being conducted under false pretenses, and a lot of people were dying, and we were taking advantage of the ignorance of the military, the soldiers themselves, not the officers. 85% of the soldiers on the ground in Iraq, when they were asked, why are you here? They said, we're here to get them back for what they did to us on 9/11. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. It was to the contrary. So, but I knew those original votes against the war would cause me to be primary, and I was warned. And they ran somebody against me with a lot of money, and there were other instances as well, but that was probably the toughest one, with the closest race after I had established myself.
We're talking to Congressman Jim Moran. The final area I want to focus on is money in politics. Do you remember when you ran in 1990, roughly how much you raised and spent? And you live in an area that is a pretty high-priced media market in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, but it was 1990, so we raised, I guess, about $1 million. That was an enormous amount of money. And to get that kind of money as a Democrat, you weren't going to get it from corporations. Stan, the incumbent, had the business community sewed up, including the defense contractors and so on. So I had to go to organized labor, and that's where I got most of the money to be competitive. And so we were able to run ads. The ads were effective. And then, as the price went up, I had to raise a couple of $1 million. Certainly, when I had a tough race, you have to. It's like a small business. You have to devote considerable amount of your time making calls, including cold calls to people who don't know you, raising money. It's part of the job.
What did you think of that, making those calls? Literally begging for money, right?
Yeah, it's demeaning. There was one person, he's from Minnesota. He would be at the Democratic National Committee, because you can't do it from your office. So he'd go over to the DNC. He'd be there every single day for 3 or 4 hours a day. And he eventually lost. I mean, he was effective raising money, but he didn't spend enough time with his constituents or on the floor or engaging in legislation. But it's not just demeaning. It's you're being part of a process that where you know that the trust and confidence of the American people is eroding because of what you're doing, because you're spending so much time raising money. You're having to go to special interests who are willing to write the big checks, but in return for your voting in a way that, the majority of the country is not in the best interest of the majority of the country. Um, but it's what you have to do. And um, I think, frankly, Steve, that the Congress almost deserves what's happening today in terms of the abdication of its constitutional role. The Congress is supposed to have the power of the purse. It's supposed to be the ultimate source of power. Our Constitution says that power comes from the bottom up, and at the top, which is the executive branch, their role is to carry out what the Congress instructs them to do and what the Congress pays them to do through appropriations. It's being reversed. And one of the reasons it's in the reverse is because the Congress itself has given in to this constant pursuit of money in return for voting the way that special interests dictate that you vote. And they have bought into the gerrymandering where, they want a safe seat. And oftentimes that safe seat is, the cost is another couple of seats that go to the other party. But it's also the cost of having a more balanced perspective. The people who will determine whether they're going to get elected are the people who vote in a primary. And the people who vote in a primary are the activists, the people who represent those special interests, who have an axe to grind, one reason or the other, and they don't think the way the majority of Americans think. They're almost solely focused on their particular special interest, and that's why you get into the identity politics, why you get into a certain domestic and foreign groups having untoward influence in our system. And so when the power, you allow that power to dissipate, to be eroded, then the vacuum is going to be filled, and the vacuum right now is being filled by a president and staff who has made clear he fully wants to control the Congress and reverse the constitutional order where the executive branch is instructing the Congress what to do instead of the way the founding fathers intended.
So with all that you have raised just now, concluding question, how concerned are you about our democracy? How concerned are you about Congress as an institution?
I'm very much concerned. We desperately need leadership. We need leadership on both sides of the aisle who will stand up, explain what they're going to do, respect the Constitution, and get us back on an even keel. Right now, we're not. And this stuff where you pick up the paper and the most basic assumptions about the way the government is supposed to work are undermined. I'm very much concerned for our democracy because we're establishing a precedent. And the next president, whether Democratic or Republican, can seize that power as well. We are heading in the direction of an autocracy and away from the original sense of a democracy. And as I've explained, the reasons are clear. Too much money in politics, the political parties deciding who is going to be the candidate instead of the majority of the people in congressional districts, and then the role of the media, where it's just too easy to live within your own echo chamber. Algorithms determine what you're going to see and hear, and they reinforce beliefs that you've already established, and they don't give you a different point of view, which is detrimental to the democratic process.
Congressman Jim Moran, Democrat from Virginia, thank you very much.
It's my pleasure to be with you, Steve. You're terrific.